I wasted so many years trying to figure out the right way. Whether I was consciously aware of it, and even if somebody had addressed it to me, I might have said, it's like, no, I'm not trying to just be right, I'm trying. But if I was really honest with myself, it's like, no, you're just trying to be right. You're trying to be right. You're trying to do it perfectly. And that desire that you're that demand that you're putting on yourself is actually fucking ruining what you're trying to do. Because you're shut down, you're closed off, you're unresponsive. And the thing you need to do is to become responsive.
This is Way of the Artist with Brandon Colby Cook and Evan Schulte.
Exploring the challenges of the creative call
so that you can claim your own path
and make your life a work of art. Tight and tidy. We're talking about movies. We love movies around here. And this one is provoked. I think that's an all right word to use for this one. By a video that you sent me from, I wish that I knew the name of the channel or whatever, but there was a YouTuber who's, I think he was a cinematographer, an actual cinematographer. Brandon's going to look it up right now. I'll keep talking while he's doing that. And he's talking about just the way that movies look. Like, why don't movies, I think it was like, why don't movies look like movies anymore? And, it was a very sort of cinematographer type of perspective on the film landscape right now, where, essentially, I almost think of it as like, this is how they used to make movies in Hollywood, from what I understand, which was like, it was kind of like a big set, like almost like a stage production, and you filled it, like did a big light fill. All right. Patrick Tommaso. So Patrick Tommaso was the channel, and it says, why don't movies look like movies anymore? ? Great little watch on that one. And does a great job of sort of showing some different, like, what he's talking about. One of the things that I loved about the video is that he used the Lindsay Lohan movie, The Parent Trap, but it was a perfect illustration, because like this was The Parent Trap was just a medium mid-budget movie from back in the day. Like, I haven't even seen that movie, but just showing like, look at how amazing this movie looks. The shots, the lighting, like there's some really terrific creative stuff that's happening there, as opposed to so much stuff now, which is just like, they just light the shit out of everything. And it doesn't have that same sense of gravitas. There seems to be less intention in terms of the making of the shot and how the shot's being all put together. And so you sent that to me, and it definitely got me thinking about, when we took Dov Simmons' film course, and, one of the old adages, as I learned from him, but it's an old adage of filmmaking, where don't rely on, we'll fix it in post. Get it on camera. Get it as good as you can on camera, like as close to the final product as you can possibly get it. Like, get that lighting, get that shot, get these things as close as you can. Whereas it seems like a lot of the trend now is, well, it's all in front of a green screen, and there's so much stuff that you can do in post now that you couldn't do before, that you just sort of don't put a lot of effort necessarily, or as much effort into trying to capture the final image on camera. Because like, well, we're going to be changing stuff. We can add things, into the background and whatever, but there's something that's lost in that approach. And this is something that I've felt for a long time. I've probably talked about it before, where I notice it when something new is filmed like on location, right? Like there's there's something, there's a, I don't know, there's a tangibility to the image that is otherwise not there. And it just grounds the story, and as opposed to just having this complete, we can throw anything we want in there. So there's that element of this conversation where we're talking about something around that video is, kicking that off. There was one other thing though, because you suggested the title of There's Something About a Movie. And it also, that just made me think of an interview I saw Quentin Tarantino do recently, where he was talking about why he still loves movies over television, right? Or even as good as television has gotten, or episodic content. And I thought he made some really good points there good points, I guess, in the sense that I agreed with him with it, where it's like, it seems to me that like a lot of series that I watch, they're great, they're fantastic, but when I look back, I have a hard time remembering what happened in them. At a certain point, it just becomes kind of a blur, unless it's like something really incredible, like something that happened in a finale where it, like, everything kind of built up to this point, and it leaves a mark. But never as much as movies have in my mind, where it's like you can tell me a great movie and I'm just like, oh fuck, remember this thing and this thing and this thing, and then it's like, and now bring up another movie, oh, this scene and this scene. Like, there is something about a movie that leaves a mark. So I said a lot of shit, Brandon.
Yeah, you said a lot of shit, a lot of good shit. Well, I to go back to the initial thought, which is that movies don't look like movies anymore. With the move into CGI, I do think we're in a growth stage of, we're figuring out, hey, look, this is what we can do. We can do CGI so well that a lot of the time when it's used subtly, most subtle CGI, unless you have an eye for it, you're probably not even going to tell. Like, there's moments where you'd be like, yeah, the CGI was great in that. And it's like, there was CGI in there? Oh yeah, there was. Like, yeah, like, think about it. Look at this. You're like, oh, wow. And it's so good. It's so nicely integrated into the shot and into the way it's done that you don't even notice it's there. But then there's other CGI. It's kind of obvious, even though it's very well done. You're like, okay, this is clearly CGI. This was not filmed in reality. This is, and there's a certain element of that, which is just, especially if it's a superhero movie, it's like, you just know, it's like, there's no way to physically create that in the world. So we understand that. And I think that as we get into this conversation, I think it's important for us to be very clear about what we're saying here as we're exploring this idea, is that there are certain points where the CGI and the demand of whatever the story's trying to do, it's absolutely necessary. And maybe the only way to do it properly is to film it somewhat flat and not try to make that cinematic necessarily look that way for that portion of it. And there's certain movies that might have more of a demand on that, like these action movies, these big high budget action movies might, they might kind of require that. I would say, for future filmmakers who are maybe moving into that realm, to really look at those films of old and figure out, well, where can I use that cinematography? Where can I use that reality in my work, even if a lot of the demands are going to be met by CGI? Because just because you have some scenes that are a little bit more flat, action is forgivable. If you think about it this way, when there's a lot of movement and a lot of action going on in film or television, just on a camera, we tend to not worry so much about the visual aesthetic of a frame. But if you stop it, if you make it very still and not have a lot going on, all of a sudden the composition, the lighting, the shadows, everything becomes very important and very meaningful. And I think one of the filmmaker struggles of the future is when they're making a movie that's kind of both reality and CGI, is how do I make these essentially two different types of movies blend into one without them being so obviously separately like two parts. So I think that's one thing about lighting. One of the things that I'm probably most interested in is talking about narrative and story in this conversation, because I've I've been sharing on the podcast a lot about just my film school and what I've been doing with that, and like, why am I doing it? And why do I care to help people make films? And, I've been having a lot of heart to hearts with myself just about like, well, what is this about? Why do I care? Do I actually want to teach people how to make movies and television and write scripts? And I realized that for me, what I care about is story. I appreciate composition. I appreciate lighting. I appreciate shooting on location and the reality filmmaking. I love the filmmaking process. But like, what I care about personally is not necessarily cinematography. And when I watched, this guy have that video, Tommaso, I think is his last name, when he was talking about the cinematography, I really appreciated his perspective, because I was like, yeah, you love cinematography, you love lighting, and you love composition. Like, clearly that's something that you made this video quite well, and you pointed out what I think is a very accurate and insightful point of view about why movies are not quite movies these days, why they're not quite looking like that. My perspective would be like more from the story side of things. That's where I would come at it from. And so something I've been realizing as I've been going down this road with the film school is that, well, I can help people to figure out how to film their movie on location. And like, I'm good at, I'd say, producing, getting things done on a budget, figuring out how to make things work when they seem impossible to work. And I'm very good at storytelling. Those are my skills. But for other things, I don't need to do that. I'm going to hire people. I'm going to get people to help me. I'm going to bring people into the school. And sure enough, the moment I decided on that, Evan, the weirdest thing is someone messaged me and said, hey, we need to do a youth group film school over here. Would you be willing to come over and kind of help us do it? And I'm like, great. You know what? This is exactly what I'm looking for. I'll come in. I'll help people figure out how to get their script off the ground, how to make it practical, how to get it shot, how to tell the story and make the story captivating. And then other people will come in and teach them how to use the actual fucking equipment, excuse my language, the lighting, and I have enough knowledge to know how to help you do it, but that really isn't my passion. And this has been very good for me personally. I don't know why I'm getting into this. I think it just, sharing with my audience, our audience who's been with us for a long time, is it's a journey. Sometimes, you might not know why you care about something, but as you go down, you start to see details. Now, so since I care about story, this is my point. I think with movies, you have a short period of time to tell your narrative. And so you don't really you don't have a lot of room to waste. And because a movie is so expensive to make and so complicated to make, if you're making on a big budget, it has extreme demands on you. If you're making on a low budget, it has extreme demands on you. The demands really never change. They're always the same no matter what budget you're working with. That's something that I've realized over my film career. So if you're just a brand new filmmaker, you're just trying to make your first feature, make a name for yourself, get out there, even if you're trying to make a proof of concept or a short film, there's going to be a lot of demands on you to figure out, how am I going to make this movie? Like, how am I first going to make it? And then how am I going to get the right people involved? How is it actually going to be good? There's all these things. How am I going to get the right people together? I don't know anybody. I don't know anything, and you might be a young kid like me. Like when I started, I was 16 years old. Like, what does a 16-year-old know about bringing a bunch of people together to help them make something that's in their head? Like, think about that. Like, sometimes I stop and I think about that and I go, that's what I'm passionate about. I want to help that young person and even older person. Maybe you're 45, 50 years old and you go, you know what? I've worked for this company for the last 40 years and 30, 40 years, and I just want to make a movie now. Like I'm interested, but you're still brand new. You're just like the 17-year-old or 16-year-old that I was. And the thing is what happens is when you have a little bit of guidance and a little bit of mentorship in a certain way, you can go do that. So anyway, not to make that the point of this conversation. My point is that right now we're in a time where people we have video on demand. So people just like having something playing, and like, what's the show? And then they'll binge the show and you just like, well, what's next? What's the next show? What's the next thing? So we're very into consuming media like we've never been before. But when we watch something that really makes an impact, I believe it makes people stop. And I think you mentioned Tarantino. I'll just use him because you mentioned him. I think Tarantino is like one of those filmmakers. He has a film, everybody stops, we all watch it, and we all talk about it for the next, at least few days, if not few weeks or few months, and sometimes few years. And sometimes films are so impactful, maybe even the next few decades, right? So yeah, I think but I don't want to just get into like the CGI and the visual. I want to talk about why story in movie is so important. And I do think, maybe this is just the purist in me because I've been in this film industry for so long. I do think we have kind of a calling, like we're coming back to that. I think people want that. They have a hunger, a thirst for it. And I think this next generation is awakening to something that like I awoken to like 20 years ago, because we go through ebbs and flows. And I think we're on that, like we're on the new crest of a wave. When it comes to narrative storytelling. I think we went through like the CGI fascination period, but I think that's kind of coming to an end. And I think what's happening now is we're getting back into the narrative fascination again, and maybe even the old school cinematographer fascination again. Anyway, I'll pass it to you.
I think of something that I've heard, in particular, I'm thinking of my brother. But I've not just him, but I've heard this from other people where, they've talked about, when they watch a movie and they're like, I just want to be entertained, like I work and blah, 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 I just want to be entertained. And it's like, well, yes, you do. Right. But what goes into that is actually, there's substance that goes into that, because you could look at in so many respects right now, the state of movies is being like, well, this is the height of entertainment. Our technology is better than it's ever been. We can do the biggest fucking fights you've ever seen, and battles and, explosions and like you can do the most outrageous shit that you could never do before. And yet people are so disengaged and disinterested from so much of what's there. And it's like, well, what's wrong? Are you not entertained? I'm giving you all the entertainment things, right? That you kind of think of as like, what's an entertaining thing to put up there? It's like, well, the part of the problem is that, it comes down to, I think of the first screenwriting book. Well, actually it wasn't the first, but like that I really dove into, Jeff Kitchen's, how to write a great movie. I think that's what it's called. I was about to say it's like how to write a movie. No, I think it's how to write a great movie. And, the thing is like, it's got to pass the who cares test, right? It's like, okay, like you're telling me about this. Okay. There's this action sequence and there's these fights, and you're going to do a big one shot, action sequence. And okay, cool. Great. We love that shit. Why not? But who cares? Who cares? Why do I care about this stuff even happening? Right? Because if I don't care about the character that's involved in it, if I don't care about, the real humanity and creating some kind of an actual connection with the audience through even the crazy shit that's going on, right? If your audience can't connect to the story and the characters and what's being said, then that's when we do tune out, right? Like it's just sort of something that's on in the background, and it's because, I know I kind of slammed on episodic content. Always like, well, you don't really remember it. I can say the same thing for a lot of new movies that I've seen. I was like, I don't really remember what happened in it, right? And it's one of those things where it's often, if you looked at it in a kind of an objective type of objective way, you could say, well, yeah, hang on. Well, why was this so forgettable? It checks all of these boxes. It has all of these things going for it, and yet it doesn't leave an impression. And that's an interesting thing when that happens. And I think that it's, and why I think it's important, why we are heading back into a direction of I think another the next sort of golden age of movie making. We've been in a sort of wasteland, and we'll be heading back into another golden age of it. At least I hope. But that does seem to be the way that these things go. I think that we're reconnecting to that thing of like, well, why is it important for us to tell these stories? Why is a story important to begin with? It's not just simply for being entertaining. While it is that, that's also not you could say its most important function. Right? Like, yeah, there is an important function to a degree of escapism for sure. But the real primal thing with story, which we've talked about this before, which is that story is when you go back through the history of humanity, story is a sacred thing. It's there to pass along something important, something that we need to remember, something that we need to chew on and wrestle with, and, you know, big questions and stuff like that. Those are the things that I think really make a movie memorable. And, you know, it's like, I think that there's been a lot of, it's like not a real genuine attempt to do that. There's very often what I see, it's like you're doing it, but it's such a shallow attempt at doing it. You know, like, it's just sort of like, okay, we need to make this relatable. So let's, I don't know, what's some kind of a feature we could give the person? Oh, they come from a broken home. Great. Perfect. Let's go. Yeah. Start film. It's like, why does that matter? You know, it's like, where's the real digging? Where's the real, you know, diving in from the creative people in there to really communicate the humanity of those things for us to grab a hold of, you know? And again, I don't want to paint everything with the same brush, because there are people making phenomenal movies out there. It's just, you know, in a way, it's like we kind of focus on this because in many ways, sort of like the mainstream movies, pop movies, of a better term, just seem to be so lacking in those things right now.
Yeah, you know, I don't know if you've ever heard of the whole idea of the head and the tail. The head is it's all the mainstream stuff. It's like the Avengers would be like the pinnacle of the head, right? Like the top of the peak. And then the tail. And they say that now because of digital filmmaking, we have a very long tail. And if you were to look at this like a graph, you would see like almost like a big bump, right? Like almost like if you look at half of it, almost like you're looking at like a monster with like a big long tail dragging behind it, and the tail's very low to the ground, and the big body is like up high. And what it's measuring is measuring like how much money did it cost to make this thing, and how much money did this thing make back, you know? And so the more it's in the head, the bigger it was. Usually the bigger the budget, and generally the bigger the return it had, and the more mainstream and more pop culture it is. And so with the tail, marketing has become very different for like filmmaking and stuff for people who are doing things independently, because the tail is so long, meaning that there's so many people making movies for very little money and for very little return. That stuff is most of the stuff that people don't know about. And, you know, I do think with movies and television, you really can't have the conversation about art without having the conversation about the business and the finance of everything. And I think when we're young and we're just starting or we're brand new to it, we kind of like go like, well, like, I don't want to care about any of that stuff, but it's just a reality. It, you know, if you want to have the big budget to make the big thing, you have to have like, you know, the return, because like, I mean, it's a simple question. Like if I said, hey, will you give me your life savings? Like maybe it's 10,000, maybe it's 100,000, maybe it's $1 million. Will you give that to me? And I'll return back, like if it's $1 million, I'll return you back 10,000. Like, are you going to do that? You're like, no, of course you're not going to do that. But we'll make a great piece of art. It'll be memorable for lifetimes. And it's like, well, are you really willing to lose all that money to make this very meaningful, impactful piece of art? And the reality is, I mean, it's just,
Most people know, but some might.
yeah, some might, but for the most part, you know, it means you're going to have to give up luxuries and comforts and things in your life. And so you have to ask yourself, like, why am I doing this in the first place? You know? And I'd say that, you know, there's the artists out there who are like the purists, who are like, they're willing to just struggle and bleed for the craft because it's all about the art for them and that's all they care about. And they're willing to, like, you know, live on canned food and bread just to survive so that they can make their art. And there are those types out there. But what I found, and I've worked with a lot of people in the film industry who say they want to make films, most people are not that. Most people don't really want to sacrifice. They want to sacrifice as little as possible. You can take the smallest person who's making their first film, and you could take a big, like I've been in the room with the multi-million-dollar producers. It's the same. They're the same person. It's just a different amount of money. It's all the same. The conversation, when you really break it down, is all the same thing. And you have to have a certain amount of empathy and understanding for that. Because I think when we are aspiring to make great art, we have to interact with the realities of this world and the demands of this world. And, you know, look, I mean, maybe maybe when you're a teenager and your parents are still helping you out, you know, it's pretty easy to be a purist in your art. But all of a sudden you have a few kids you got to feed and, you know, you got a house to manage and, you know, you've had these things you built in your life and you don't want to lose that. All of a sudden making that purist art film, putting everything on the line, potentially losing your house, losing your vehicles, losing everything you own, not being able to feed your children. All of a sudden, making a great piece of art just isn't as big of a deal anymore, you know? And I think that's a natural part of the evolution of the artist growing up and evolving in their craft. So I think it's important that I'm not going to necessarily say my like opinions on, and because there's a lot to get into about that, but I just want to say that I would say you're thinking about that too. It's in the back of both of our minds as we're having this conversation. I think, you know, I like what Rob Reiner said to us when we went down to the American film market that one time. And I raised my hand and I asked him, like, you know, as a young filmmaker, like, what do you think I should do for making films? And he was like, just make films that you care about and you believe in. Cause like they might work, they might not work, but at least you'll know you made some films that you really cared about and you're passionate about. And he said, you know, that's what I did. And he talked about Spinal Tap and he talked about Stand By Me. And he was like, and he mentioned Stand By Me during that. And he said, you know, I didn't know if Stand By Me would work, which was based on The Body by Stephen King, the book. He's like, but there's something about these kids that I just related to. And it just seemed very true. And I wanted to tell that story. And I felt like I would. And Stand By Me, I just rewatched it actually the other day. Such a great movie. It was great then. It was great now. It's just, it's going to stand the test of a time, of timeless. It's just about four kids who say, hey, let's say to our parents, we're having a sleepover at each other's house and let's go take a 30-mile hike out into the fucking middle of nowhere to look at a dead body, you know, and then maybe we can get in the newspaper. That's all these kids want to do. And then adventure. That's all it is, right? But it's fucking great. And it's just like, man, it's about boyhood. It's about becoming a man. It's about adventure. It has so many great qualities in it, right? And the thing is like, you know, you can have the people crunch the numbers and go, well, I don't really know if that would work. You know, there's not enough action in this. There's not enough whatever. And that's where the artist has to that's where you got to develop that kind of thing to be able to speak to the people who are risk adverse and say, hey, look, I believe in this. And not just convince them you believe in it, but really believe in it. And then put your heart into it and try to figure out, and it's not just enough to have your heart in it, to try to gather together enough skills, enough knowledge, enough mentorship, guidance, coaching, people who can help you, experts in certain areas, to help you bring that feeling and vision to life. There's something about a movie when that happens. That's what I'm really talking about here. It's that, it's in your mind and your heart, and somehow you're getting other people to help you make that real. That's what I'm talking about when we say there's something about a movie, because I feel like only really a movie, it's like one of the art mediums where I would say it's one of the only things where it really does demand, I'd say, the pinnacle of that. I'd say making an album is up there. I would say, making a music album. I would say, there's like designing certain things in other mediums is probably up there. But making a movie, man, like you're taking people who often go, I just want to tell a story. I have a vision in my head. There's something in my heart. I want to get it out there. They usually don't even know how they're going to do it. And they cobble together the right people and they fucking like gamble. They play a fucking hand and they go, let's see if this works. Yeah. And a lot of the time it doesn't, unfortunately, but when it does, we fucking honor it and cherish it. And that's special to me.
Yeah. That reminds me of something else that I remember Dov Simmons saying to us. I don't know. I probably won't quote this exactly accurately, but he said something to the effect of, "Hey, you made a film? Fucking congratulations. Yeah. Amazing." Because it is. It's so insane. And there is something very miraculous about a movie getting made because of the amount of people and from different disciplines of everything all coming together, just trying to tell a story, right? Like it comes down to that, just trying to tell a story and all these people who are involved with telling a story, and hopefully it's something great. Like there is something that's like that every single movie that's ever made is a bit of a wing and a prayer. To some level, like there's things that we've learned about it, and there's ways in which you try that we've tried to make something succeed and whatever. But I mean, sometimes that can be part of the problem too, right? Sometimes the thing's like, well, no, it's got to have this and it's got to have that, and it's like, and that's the thing that actually ends up fucking ruining the thing, right? So there's always an element of absolute chance that's an operation, and that's part of creativity. It's like pottery in that way, where it's like you can learn a lot, and hey, there's a difference between a new potter and someone who's like, an absolute artisan at what they do. But there's, no matter what, there's always an element of like, when you put that shit into the kiln and it cooks in there at like outrageous temperatures, it's going to do things that you don't know it's going to do. Right. And sometimes it's going to blow up, even when you're a master, right? Sometimes that shit happens, right? Maybe it happens to you less, but it still happens, and like, what do you do with that? How do you reconcile that? And it brings you back into the big questions, I think, again, of like, well, it's about the process of what you're doing and why you're doing what you're doing, and something that I feel like we haven't talked about in terms of where this conversation started from, bring it back into this thing of, it was kind of about cinematography and everything, but you wanted to focus on, story as well. And it's like, well, part of the thing I think that we need to talk about there is like, well, there's the connection that's there between those things, right? Because movies are a visual medium. So the images are so important to what it is. The thing that is maybe getting lost to a lot of people, perhaps, I'm speculating here, but is the fact that the visuals, the images that you're creating are in service of the story that you're telling. And that story is full of like, what are the themes? What are the events? What is the feeling and the emotion of what's happening right now that's on screen? And these are the things that help you to make those creative choices, right? And you see the great, like the really great cinematographers and directors and a lot of those sort of partnerships that happen where it's like they just do things that are so magical, right? And they're not always realistic either, right? It's not always about like, oh yeah, this is like what it really looks like. It's like, no, this is, there's it's like a Meisner, I think Meisner said something like this, where it's like, the theater isn't an imitation of reality. It demands a greater truth. And, or there's also like, what's that other saying too, where it's like, we tell a lie to tell an even greater truth or something. Like that's part of the whole thing where it's like, yeah, it looking like super real, like it actually does in the world, is not the point. Yeah. The point is I need the light to do this and to create these shadows in here because I'm trying to show the mood of the situation or the internal state of this character right now. And this is more real than what this would actually look like if you were just to snap a photo of it in real life. Right? But then again, there might be a movie that you're making where trying to capture it in the most realistic sense possible is the way to do it. Yes. Right? Like, because that's going to serve the story in some way. That's going to serve the vision, the theme, the what you're trying to say with it. That's going to be the thing that does it. And that's, again, this show is never about, we're giving you answers, right? Like it's always in response. Like creativity is a thing of constant like feedback and responding to and like stepping away, coming in, like, and knowing when to do these things, right? And building those sensibilities and those sensitivities and understanding how to respond is really that's what I've learned about creativity and artistry. And it's something that I wish that I understood when I was way younger, because I wasted so many years trying to figure out the right way. Yeah. Whether I was consciously aware of it, and even if somebody had addressed it to me, I might have said, it's like, no, I'm not trying to just be right, I'm trying. But if I was really honest with myself, it's like, no, you're just trying to be right. Mm-hmm. You're trying to be right. You're trying to do it perfectly. And that desire that that demand that you're putting on yourself is actually fucking ruining what you're trying to do, because you're shut down, you're closed off, you're unresponsive. And the thing you need to do is to become responsive, right? And that's like, there's a connection between that statement and where this conversation began that I can't quite put my finger on. I can't quite put my finger on it. I need to sit with it. So if you've got something to say, go for it.
Okay, well, I love what you brought up about how the internal mood is being represented in the visual image of film. I think this is such an important thing. Any young filmmaker or any filmmaker who's listening to this, I mean, that you brought up something that is such a valuable and important element of film, and it's not talked about enough. And this thing about realism, there is a time and a place where realism, like raw, gritty realism is the film, and that's what it's about. And there's something about that that's just, it's perfect. But not every film is about that. Actually, very few are really about that. And you're talking about how, like, for example, you ever see like an interrogation scene and the police are interrogating and like there's like a hard light on the suspect and it's like dark cast shadows and the whole room's just shadows all around, or it's like a boxing ring and it's just so dark in there, and it's, it's like, it's not like that. I mean, that stuff's lit up like, because everybody's got to see the big spectacle of the event. In reality, it's bright as bright can be. I mean, it's about as bright as they can get it before they blind everybody. But in a movie, it's not like that. I was just watching a boxing movie the other day called Bleed for This. And when you yeah, and when you look at the boxing scenes, they're dark and whatever, and there's but cinematically it looks way better than it would. And I'm not going to necessarily speak on that movie achieving the mood necessarily as high as, say, like something like Raging Bull or something like of that caliber. But there's something about these types of movies where when they darken it, they're bringing out there's a darker mood going on. I always remember this, listening to this talk by Jack Nicholson after he did The Shining. Well, he was actually shooting The Shining, and they were picking him up from like the hotel or wherever he was staying. And he was talking about his bad breath, and he was talking about how, movies are not always just about like what's real. It's about what's entertaining. It's about what's interesting, And it really hit me that he was so right about that like, I do want to believe it. Like, I want to believe it's real. Like, don't get me wrong. I don't want you to pull me out of the magic of the moment that I'm experiencing, but I don't really want it real. I think I do, but I don't. What I want is you to give me the experience that I'm supposed to have. And so much of that is done through style and mood. And, talking about the lighting, it does so much of that for us because we know, like, there's something I learned in film school for the brief part that I was in it, like how a certain color can bring out a certain mood or give you a certain idea, or, darker shadows, more cast shadows, this type of stuff. It gives you a certain heaviness, or, and also if something's hidden off in the distance in the darkness, it's like, well, what's out there? I can't see it. I don't know. And that creates a feeling. And these are very like little things you don't even notice as a viewer. But if you remove them, you would all of a sudden feel different. I was rewatching a TV show actually, and Arrested Development, which I love the first 3 seasons of Arrested Development, but I do not like the second 2. And the further I get into the second 2, the more I'm like, oh, something went wrong. Like you lost the vibe, you lost the feeling. Like it's not as funny. It's darker. The humor is like more sexualized and kind of, I just want to say dark. Like it's not as like in the first seasons, it felt good. Like these were idiots, bumbling idiots. Like but you get more into the drama in the last 2 seasons. And there's a certain point where they actively went to do this where, without ruining anything, I mean, whatever, it's an old show. So look, if you don't want to listen, don't listen to this brief moment, but there's a moment where they're going through these memories of like what it was like when they were kids and their parents. And this is in like the later seasons. And you're like, the music is like not the same. The music's like heavy and low and like kind of like emotional. And you're like, what the hell is this music? Like, why is this so like drab and dark and like it feels dramatic, and I like don't like it because I'm not really watching this show to have this dramatic experience. I want to have a light, funny, I want to laugh, I'm not here to have this experience. And I felt disrupted and kind of taken out of it. But at the same time, I'm like, I'm going to observe, I'm going to look at it and watch. Well, sure enough, as the story goes on, you realize that wasn't actually their memories. That was the TV crew recreating memories of their life based on how they perceive their life, based on the story. And they are telling it in a dramatic way, but you're presented though as though it's their memories. And what you realize is this is someone's interpretation of their story who sees their story as dark. But their memories are very light and like funny. So maybe there's something to appreciate about the second 2 seasons, and particularly because they have this. I think this might be the final season. Maybe there's something to appreciate about the fact that they went there and played with this. I didn't like it personally, like emotionally. My enjoyment of the show diminished quite substantially during this period of the rewatch, but I could appreciate the fact that I'm like, well, you created a mood, you created a feeling, and you did this, and you tried something. For me, it didn't work. Maybe it worked for someone else. But the point is that I just want to mention what you're saying. Maybe they were trying to achieve a mood, and you know what? You did it. But also, maybe you did it in a way where you didn't quite earn it, or maybe, at least for me, but if other people loved it, and hey, look, I could be wrong. I'm just a guy with an opinion, whatever. But the thing is what I will say is mood played a part in it. And changing the music and changing the lighting and changing a few things, all of a sudden it feels different, And that's so much of what cinema is. It's about, it's a TV show, but it's still cinema in its own right, But we can do that. We can change the music. We can change the lighting. We can change the angle. We can change how tight or how wide the frame is. We can do a whole bunch of things to change the feeling of something. And it's such an important part of storytelling because it is a part of the story.
Well, yeah, it's how we're interpreting the story as, when you're creating it, because there's always a certain level of interpretation that's going on. And, and that's the thing is sometimes you make a choice and you stick to something. It doesn't mean that everybody's going to like it. And in a way, I think that's part of the problem with a lot of mainstream movie making these days. It's like, it's just trying to please too many people. Right. And then it ends up, like what's the old saying is like, you try to please everybody, you'll please nobody. Right. It's like, stick to your guns, really make something like understand what it is that you're trying to say and commit yourself to saying it as the best that you can, right? And there'll be people who don't like it, but you're probably going to find a hell of a lot more people who do like it, who are like, you know what? I really got it. I really saw what you were trying to do. I really picked up what you're trying to do. I thought you really succeeded in all these ways. Maybe in some areas it didn't, it's not about being perfect, right? But it's about having something that's worthwhile saying, right? And something that's comes from a place of passion and real honesty and speaking it. Like there's a quality to that even when it doesn't quite hit the mark, the audience still usually picks up on it and appreciates it, right? Like that's something that I've noticed. Like I've seen loads of movies where I was just like, it's like, hey, was it amazing? No, but there was heart. Yeah. There was heart in that movie. Like that's something that we say all the time. It's like there was heart in it, right? It wasn't technically or whatever the most maybe impressive thing, but it had something and it connected with me in some way. And that in a way is like enough. That can be enough. That can be good enough, right? Like I remember reading this saying of like, the forest would be awfully quiet if only the most beautiful songbirds sang, right? And there is room for things to just be like really great. They're part of the tapestry. And those in many ways are things that we still need those to sustain us, and then every now and then something comes along and really blows us away with something, right? Like I really want to watch Dune with you. Oh yeah. Because you haven't watched them and I want to rewatch them. Even that's something that, there's some interpretation that's going on with that. Especially when it's like something that comes from a beloved sort of novel, a beloved book series, right? And even that is something that in the masterful hands of Denis Villeneuve, like he had to make some interpretive choices with that. Not necessarily everybody loved it, but it was, there were certain things that he thought were important to do in this, and he had good reason for it. And the result is that, it was one of the great pieces of cinema in recent history. So I don't want to get too much into that. I would love for us to actually have a conversation about that, about those movies after we both watched them. But I'll hand it back.
Well, a couple things that I wanted to bring up, and I've been wanting to kind of talk about this movie because I recently watched it. It's called Labor Day. And it's with Kate Winslet and Josh Brolin. And I would say, like, it's kind of narrated by a little boy, essentially, but I would say, femme-centric in the sense that it's a female leading character, essentially. Really, the narrative is. And okay, I just think this is important to mention because being a male, watching a female-driven narrative and still enjoying it and still understanding it, I think is important to mention because this movie wasn't necessarily made for me. Like I'm not the ideal audience member. I would say that this is more It's made for women probably between 30 to 50, maybe older, but it's a drama. But does it start like that? And it earns it. And this is what I love. It starts very intense, very thrilling, very like, ooh, whoa, we're in danger. What's happening? We're on edge. Like, are we getting into a thriller? What's happening here? Like, what kind of movie are we getting into? And it starts to unfold. And I remember there's a certain point, and I always try to keep track of movies. I'm like, well, how many minutes are we in? Like, where are we at when this happened? Because I like to kind of keep track of plot points and try to figure out how the story's telling. But this is before I'd seen the rest of it. And then we kind of got to a certain point, and I paused it to get up and grab some tea or something like that. And I was just like, okay, where's this going? Oh, okay, I think I know where this is going. And I was like, I was right, but only because I'm like very like, I think mostly because I'm on the ball about like storytelling. But I was like, well done. Well done. You brought me into the story in a way that was, you really set up the drama properly. Like you gave me the emotional thrill experience I needed to give context to the rest of what this story is really supposed to be. And I enjoyed it. I thought it was really quite well done. And I don't think it's a standout movie. I don't think it's one of those movies people like talk about for the ages, but it had heart. And I wouldn't even say that it was one of those movies that like it was, it was flawed or there were really any problems with it. But it was like, to me, it was like just a good, solid narrative that did, that brought me on a journey and I could understand it, and when you kind of, like something I've been researching recently, I've been really, cause someone asked me to like about romance stories, right? So it's something that I've been like just researching a lot and I've been really trying to understand it. And, as I've been looking into it, I've been looking at like, well, the consumers of romance stories tend to be women, right? And like 50 Shades of Grey, for example, why'd that do so well? Why did it become such a hit when it's such a, it's okay. Look, from a uninvolved narrative delivery, it's mediocre, but from a femme-centric tapping into a certain kind of narrative, tapping into a certain psychology, it's quite brilliant. And as I started to research this more, I was like, well, what this story does is it taps into something. It taps into a sense of taboo. It taps into danger. It taps into being special, meaning something to someone. It taps into very deep roots of love, particularly from a feminine perspective. And probably that you could argue there are some aspects of masculine perspective, although that's not in the lens that I was looking at it. But I was like, okay, I see why this works. I get it. And, you mentioned something earlier. If you try to make something everyone will like, probably no one will like it. And I'm sure there are lots of people that go, oh, 50 Shades of Grey, so dumb, so stupid, whatever. And there are people who just absolutely love it and think it's the greatest thing ever. It was made for the people who think it's the greatest thing ever. It was not made for the people that think it's stupid and dumb. And the thing is I think that's another thing about what we're talking about here is that if you think a movie is really stupid and dumb, but it's doing really well, it probably wasn't made for you. And like, if you can kind of separate yourself from your own opinions and your own position, you might be able to appreciate it for what it is. Another movie I love, which I don't think it's femme-centric, but I also don't think it just appeals to a female audience. And I love this movie. I've mentioned it many times before on the podcast, I think at least once. Thelma and Louise is such a great movie because it's about these two women who are basically best friends, and they just get themselves into a bunch of trouble and they go on an adventure, reluctantly, not planning on it. It starts off as fun and games, and then it turns out to be something else. And, there's a little bit of like, where it's like, fuck the patriarchy kind of stuff where I'm like, oh, that's kind of silly. But, at the same time, I get it from their character's perspective and what they're going through in their narrative. And for the audience it was made for, which was for women more than men, that's fine. I still think as a man, I could enjoy that movie. I think it was a very well told narrative. and it brings you along. It's thrilling, it's interesting, it's dramatic, it has all the elements. And Thelma and Louise is a movie that to me is timeless. I feel like it's one of those movies that we will talk about forever. It's one that, like, you know, I'd show my kids and say, hey, do you ever hear about this movie Thelma and Louise? And they'll be like, no. And then I'm like, okay, let's watch it. And they're like, whoa, that was really cool. And it was like before their time, you know what I mean? I wouldn't say the same thing about Labor Day, but I'd say kind of like what you're talking about. It had heart, and it gave me a nice, succinct story. And I walked away feeling happy about it. You know what I mean? And sometimes I feel like we all want to have the Thelma and Louise. We all want to make the great movie. But I think if you can make a movie that just tells a proper narrative and has a good story, I think there's something about that. And I do think that the world is kind of asking for that. And the reason why, and I'm not just going to say that because it's like my opinion. If you look at just the way Disney and the way like a lot of these major companies, like the way they're struggling financially, like they're becoming more and more narrow in the risks in which they're willing to take, and their movies are becoming so vanilla, and people are almost going like, forget it. And unless they bring something out that kind of is a little special, people are just like not into it. That's why I think there's a certain kind of calling. Like once things start to get so vanilla, all of a sudden we're like, wouldn't it be nice if we had a little flavor? And flavor is going to happen in those smaller budget, kind of sometimes more risky or more tailored to a certain audience type of story.
Oh man, lot to cover there. Well, I mean, I would say that, you know, because like I don't really look very often through the lens of when I see a movie, whether it's well, I mean, I guess it depends. Certain genres tend, like I'm a believer in tendencies. There's no rules, but there are tendencies, and certain things like a rom-com is usually tends to have a larger female audience, right? But not always. And so it's like I think of like just coming back to the point of, it's like, well, a great story with heart, it doesn't matter what your age, your sex, your race, like they're connective. Great stories are connective, and where all of these things become superficial, right? Because it's like, I see what's happening to you in the story and what you're going through, and there's some part of me that relates to that thing. You know, I can grab onto it. Like, as crazy as it might seem, you know, one of the reasons why Thelma and Louise stands the test of time is because so many people can connect to it in some way, right? There's, you know, the people that are after them, the husband, and like, it's like we can all kind of relate to that in some metaphorical way. Like it's, you know, I think great stories, they speak to us in these metaphorical truths. They speak to us in these mythical truths. And that's when, you know, it gets into something really special, right? Because it's transcending all of our sort of labels for stuff. And that's really, I mean, God, and especially with storytelling and movie making, like that's the pinnacle of I think of what you're trying to achieve. And there was something also that I wanted to say, I think it had something to do with, you know, you were talking about Disney. Oh yeah, that's right. Yeah, Disney. You're talking about Disney, you know, and like a lot of other places, they're just kind of putting out vanilla. Again, I think trying to just please too many people and just be too politically correct. I'll just use the term, but I think that is, it's part of their problem right now, is they're just trying to not offend people and just be, and it just all ends up becoming too vanilla. It's just like, if you had something really good there, you just watered it down, right? Yeah. It's like you had a really nice, rich, you know, concentrate there or something, and you just kept on pouring water in it, and now it just doesn't really taste like anything. It barely tastes like the thing it started out as. But, you know, like, I know that they've got like a re-release of Snow White coming out, and like, my God, why we need to have live action versions of everything that was animated right now is just driving me crazy. But they're making a Snow White, and apparently it's had a lot of issues coming up to its release. No, I think they are, but like it's the fact that that's like they might not even release it is because they've been having so many issues with it, and in trying to I don't know, have this a certain kind of appeal to it. And one of the things that, like, from what I understand, and I do get a certain aspect of it, but it does to me speak to a certain kind of trend, which is, like, they're apparently going for a Snow White who it's just like, I don't need a man, like the story's about like a woman who can, be a leader and be self-empowered and, doesn't need anyone to save her. There's an aspect of me, it's like, hey, I like a story about a person being empowered and making empowered decisions. But at the same time, a lot of people are griping. It's like, yeah, but Snow White's a love story. Mm-hmm. Is there love in this story? Like, is this like, there's like, what's wrong with a love story anymore? It's like, there's something, that's some sort of an antiquated notion to us now, where it's just like, oh, like it's a naive, it's a juvenile concept. And hey, look, perhaps it is in ways that the original story was told, and there are ways to reinvent it. But it's like, are we throwing out something that's actually really important? Right? Like, to me, every great story is about love. In some respect, if you get down to the bottom of it, it's about love in there somewhere.
Yeah.
Right? Even in very dark stories, it's like there's something that calls to a certain aspect of love, or an aching of love, or desire for love, or whatever it is. It's in there. And it's like, maybe I'm getting a little off topic here, but it's, we're in a culture that's like, it's like, that's a weakness. Mm-hmm. That's weak. But if you look at what everybody really wants at the end of the day, what do we all want? It's love. Like, we all want that thing. And we're trying to all go around acting like, no, I don't need that shit. Yeah. I don't need that shit. Right? And so we're taking it out of our stories. And, to me, that's a huge mistake. You can reinvent in so many respects the Snow White story, but like, where's the love, man? Where's the love? Because it seems like, in terms of how they've been communicating it and marketing it, it's just like, no, this is about a person standing on their own and being their own person and not needing anyone or whatever. And it's just like, okay, but like, love's cool too, man.
Well, it makes me think of that saying, no one's an island, right? You're not alone in this world. You're inextricably bonded with people, regardless whether you like it or not. It's just a reality. And I think there's a bunch of bullshit going on in the world right now, where this is like immature element of like independence. I'm independent. I don't need anybody. And it's like, I don't need a man. I don't need a woman, whatever. You do. You need people. You know what? You do. And the thing is that it's not about being dependent. It's about being useful, but recognizing where you're not able to do certain things that other people can do. And that's humanity throughout history has survived because we come together. It's not because we go off on the bush on our own and just live all singular. That's not what we do. And the reason why we flourish and become apex predator of the world is because we figured out how to have teams, how to communicate, how to love. And truly to love, because if we didn't love, we would just, we just kill every enemy we had, right? To have compassion, we develop these types of things. And I think at Disney, I think it's a combination of two things. I think it's partly trying to please everybody and not taking any risks and not taking anything. And then another part of it is excluding people, specifically excluding people and saying, well, screw you if you don't want to watch our movie. It's like, well, Look, I don't care if you have your opinion, if you have your point of view and you want to tell your story your way about your life, but invite me into it. Welcome me into your world. Don't just say like, oh, you don't like it, screw you. Like that's just stupid. It's just dumb. And you don't, here's the thing, Disney, you can't get away with that because movies don't work that way. And for fucking thank God they don't work that way. Because the only way a movie works is if enough people want to fucking watch it. So if you want to make the big budget movie, you got to figure out how to get enough of us to feel like we're going to care about your stupid little story. And it isn't stupid if enough of us care about it. And we're going to tell you it's stupid if you exclude us. You know, when I was in school and I was part of the popular club, and then I realized that a lot of these people were kind of like, I didn't like their qualities. You know, they were like, well, you know, you're just going to have to like bend the knee essentially to us, right? Of course, it wasn't said that way or presented that way, but, you know, I said, well, fuck you. You know what I mean? I don't want to be any part of you if that's what you're about. And what ends up happening is that's a natural response, you know, but we have responses to the world where we compromise ourselves to go, well, you know, I don't want to rock the boat. I want to fit in. But there's a whole other portion of society that says, you know what? Fuck me, fuck you. And I think we're a little bit in that world right now with film. We're like, no, you don't get to just tell me that I'm not good enough for you. You're not good enough for me. And yes, this does create independence. It does create a separation, but that's a necessary part of the evolution of our growth. Because ultimately the goal is we got to come back together. We have to figure out a way to come back together. You know, and you mentioned about how love is in every story, and I want to just give a couple examples. Here's a male love story. Castaway. The guy's stranded on an island thinking about a woman that he's desperately in love with, and all he wants to do is go back. And everybody thinks he's dead. And the world moves on without him, and he comes back, and it's fucking heartbreaking. But look at the fucking end of the movie. It's still about love. The whole fucking thing is about love. It's just more from a male perspective, which is very much about the male version of romance is I'm alone, I'm working on myself, I'm trying to figure out my struggles. You know, how do I find it? How do I get it? You know, and that's so much about how our perspective is of it. And a female perspective might be happening more now, but traditionally not. Right? And maybe it is happening, but in a different way, but a bit of a different lens, because I can understand how a female perspective is like, you know, when will Prince Charming come along? You know, you look at Cinderella, that type of thing. I think there's some truth to that. There's some truth about these types of stories where it's like, you know, we are all waiting for that love, you know? You have something to say. Go ahead.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that, yeah, like you're saying, we're all waiting for that love. That's part of and sometimes that's part of the fantasy. That's the dream of like, we have this thing of like somebody coming and just blowing our minds, you know, and like breaking our hearts wide open. Like like Castaway is a really great, beautiful example, because a movie I was thinking about, which is like, you know, maybe makes a different point. I was thinking about Superbad, right? This outrageous late night comedy, you know, that's very misogynistic in many ways. Yeah. But when you look at what happens in that story, it's like about these two geeks who are actually like fucking in love with these girls who like, they just don't think that they're good enough for. Yeah. Right. And even though they say really crass things and crude things that they'd like to do, when it all kind of comes down to the moment, they just become like, they're just brought to their knees. Yeah. Like their vulnerability, and it just kind of comes pouring out that they're just like, and there's something so sweet and honest and beautiful. And then it's also the love story between those two, right? Like it's just like, but it's Superbad is a love story. Yeah. Superbad is 100% a love story. Yeah. Like there's no getting around that. You'd say it's a coming of age story and all. Yeah. It's all that, but it's a love story, right? Like it's like when you boil it all down.
Well, you know, I brought up Stand By Me. It's, you know, it's a drama, but you could say it's a love story. And, you know, River Phoenix and I forget the guy who's the main character right now. I forget his name. But anyway, just like this friendship, and really all four of the kids, but like, fuck the whole movie. Like, this is something I didn't even realize until the rewatch. The whole reason why we're being told this story, at least in the movie version, because I've never read the book, The Body, but is that, I don't want to ruin it if you haven't seen it, but it's about something that happened with that friendship as adults later. And they're going back and they're remembering, hey, it was this time when I was a kid and I went on this fucking adventure with three of my best friends. And, and that's the whole reason why he's telling us this story. And it's really to honor his friend. It's a love story to his friend. And when I stop to think about it, fuck, it actually breaks my heart. Because I just like, holy fuck, oh my God. But it's like, that's the thing though. We forget that that's the tethering bond that fucking holds the whole thing together. It's like, why is it good? It's good, yes, because the acting is great. The cinematography was really well done. Everything was really nice about the whole way the movie was made. But yeah, when we come back down to the story, there's these tethering things. And I really do think the love, we've talked about this in the podcast before, there's something about the love. And I would say too, like, for the artists who are more technical, maybe in the cinematography, your love for cinematography, it breathes through the movie. We experience your care. So I'd say, like, at the end of the day, you might not call it love, you might call it care, you might call it some other name because maybe you have resistance to that. But at the end of the day, it's what do you love? What do you care about? And how are you sharing that with us? This conversation has been fascinating. There's been so many things and so many avenues I still feel like I want to venture down. But, I hope for our audience that maybe it just inspires you to stop, take a moment and appreciate cinema and something about a movie in particular. And maybe, go back and watch some great ones. And then, for the future generation, see how you can bring that into the next, because I think it's an exciting time for everybody. I think it's an opportunity. I think the next generation of filmmakers, I think, you have a chance to kind of pop out and go against the grain, a little bit. There's one other point I want to make, but I need to think about it. So I'm going to let you, debrief first, but maybe you can share the beer. I've been enjoying it.
Yeah, we are having this one. The can looked so enticing to me. This is from Category 12 Brewing. Again, not sponsored. We're just having a beer, as we always do on this podcast. And it's from Victoria, BC. And Category 12 Mexican Lime Lager. And it's a nice light lager with a nice, it's really tasty. Yeah. I've really been, I was surprised at how I've had some like lime flavored lagers before that have just been like a little bit, they just don't taste quite right. They kind of sometimes taste a little bit fake and synthetic or something like that. But this is just tasty. This was just real tasty. So yeah, I don't know. I enjoyed it. I drink it again.
Yeah, I would too. I'd have a second after this one. I find it really tasty. And yeah, I agree with you. I mean, lime infused beers generally I like, that seems gross to me, but this one was great and has been great all the way through. From the first sip, I was just like, I like this one a lot. And I would definitely go off and get one of these again for sure. I feel like this is also like, it's great right now. It's like kind of the start. We're still in the start of the new year, but like, I feel like summer, I'm like, this would be even better. Like, great drink. Good choice.
All right. Well, I guess I'll make some kind of closing remarks here. And just something that you said about this particular conversation is like, yeah, like we've covered a lot of different places of ground here, and it does feel like we could just kind of continue talking about it. I think partially because that's in so many ways where our sort of artistic passion began, was movies. So it's like I love talking about movies. I don't watch enough movies anymore. But and one thing that I shared with, I think I've shared a couple of these videos. There's like a channel I follow, I think it's called something like I'm like you're Lebowski, or I'm not Lebowski, or something, like some kind of a funny channel name like that. But it's basically they share these clips of like people who are watching great movies and them reacting to it for the first time and stuff. And there's something I really get a kick out of watching these videos from time to time. And it's like, oh yeah, like, a movie I haven't seen in a long time, or a scene that just was memorable, right? Like a great scene from a movie, and seeing people watch it for the first time, and the magic, and seeing them just getting so caught up in that moment, like it, and it may be leaving the same kind of mark and impression on them that it did on me. There's something about a great movie, right? And it comes down to really caring about what you're doing, and it's not that, I always get, whenever I make statements like that, I always like come in and it's like, well, just check yourself for a second, Evan. Like for a second, let's just like maybe temper that to some degree, because there are super passionate people out there doing things. I think that, like there's it's like you got to really commit to the thing, right? And that means sometimes committing to that shot with that lighting and with that background and that fucking location. And it's like, well, we can just kind of pick and choose whatever the fuck we want in post. It's just like, no, fucking make a choice on this. Like, make a choice that you can't take back. Right? Like, there's something about when you can just sort of do anything and everything at any point that just is like, it removes something from the equation that is maybe really essential. Maybe this sounds like something that needs to be a whole conversation in itself, right? But it's like that something is on the line where it's like, you need to get this shot and you need to get it in this way because this is the way it's going to be. Right? But there is, and sometimes that can blow up in your face. As we've talked about, sometimes these things blow up in your face a little bit. But I think that there's a much greater ceiling when you're working that way. When you're working from that level of crafting something and putting it together. It's like, what's this shot going to be? What's happening in the scene? And how do we want to communicate this in the best way possible? And working with someone, say like, what do you think? How should we light this? Like it's, and do it.
Yeah.
And you do it there and you capture it. And it's like, that's how you really get the lightning in a bottle. Otherwise it's not really the lightning in a bottle anymore. Like you're just like, well, it's I don't even know what you would fucking call it. It's just like, it's a LED in an aquarium. That's terrible metaphor. Yeah. But you know what I'm going for. You know what I'm going for on this one. So it's, I think that it's like really having that point of view. And I think that that's maybe a lot of what's missing is it's all too watered down and too afraid to really just go for something. And it's just like, no, have your point of view. It's one of the most essential things I can tell you for an actor. It's one of the most important things that I work on when I'm working on a part. John Malkovich said so, where he says if I really understand my character's point of view, I understand how to go into every scene that I'm doing. Right? Like there's knowing what that thing is and where you stand and having that grounding is a kind of a springboard for great creative things to happen. But you can't just be blown around by the wind all the time with this. And that can be a scary way to work, right? Because again, some people might not like it, right? Some people might not like your point of view and how you chose to do the thing and interpret the thing or whatever it is. But that is also the price of doing something really great. Again, I've said this on the show before. I I fucking heard somebody say that Daniel Day-Lewis's performance in There Will Be Blood was sloppy. Holy shit, man. The fuck are you talking about? Somebody said this shit, and I'm sure some other people have said this shit like that too. It's like, it doesn't matter how great you are. You can be the absolute best, giving one of the great performances or whatever it is in the history of the thing that it's ever been done. And someone's still going to be like, not for me, thanks. Thought it was a little bit rough, to be honest. You know, you're going to just have that kind of shit. You're going to have that kind of reaction. But then you're also going to have, you know, for what it's worth, people like myself who's just like, that was the greatest screen performance that I've ever seen in my entire life. And to me, that is the standard with which I will failingly but ever try to live up to.
Yeah, and I also think with art, you know, you don't always have to be understood. I think that's an important thing for artists to know. You know, it's like, you know, as I think about this conversation, you know, at one point you mentioned, I wish I knew this when I was younger. You were talking about, like, I was always trying to get it right. And yeah, that's like one of those things. It's like, man, the sooner you could learn to not need to get it right, the better off you'd be. And the sooner off you learn to not live by people's approval, the better off you would be. You know, and I think sometimes you might find yourself be creative or an artist in a certain way where you're ahead of your time. You're just onto something that no one else is onto yet. And people won't understand it. I wrote a story when I was still in college. I was 20, maybe. It was about a story that was about I would say like a psychopath who was a kid. He was like a young man. And the world just didn't understand him. He had all these problems, but he was very courageous and audacious and all this really cool things, you know, but he had a lot of problems in his personal life and, you know, whatever. And he was kind of like trying to navigate. But, and the reason why I wrote this, because I worked on set with a guy who was like a psychopath. And I didn't really understand what he was at the time, but I thought he was fascinating because he was like just so bold and courageous. And he had these qualities that like normal people just didn't have. And I admired it. But at the same time, the guy was always in trouble with the law. Like he had the police after him. Like it's chaos, you know? And I was just like, what a fascinating person he was. And so I based this character off of like interacting with this guy. And then I hung out with him for a bit, you know, afterwards. And, you know, and it just, the trouble followed, you know, with him and, you know, eventually kind of parted ways, you know. I just knew I was kind of treading a dangerous line. But I remember I showed this script to someone and they said they read the first bit of it and they just tore the shit out of it. Like they told me all this, I don't know what they said, but they just were like, what is this for shock value? Da, 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 da. And I remember just being so discouraged. I put the script away and I didn't think I finished it. I actually just was like, hey, well, I guess I'm not, I don't know. Maybe I'm just off on this. And 10 years later, like just a little after 10 years later, I was going through some boxes and I pulled it out and I was like, holy shit, I finished this script. I actually wrote the thing. And I started reading it and I was like, fuck, this is good. 10 years later. And then all this stuff about narcissism and, you know, sociopaths and psychopaths, all this shit's like mainstream now. Everyone's talking about it. 10 years before any of that shit was mainstream, I wrote a story about someone like this. I was just fucking ahead of the game, but I didn't know, and I was discouraged, and I was trying too much to get outward approval. And I, you know, you can't know that you're ahead of the game. You can't know you're ahead of the game. Yeah, Evan said that. And the thing is that, you know, I would say, you know, we're programmed in culture about getting it right. Like there is a right answer. And I think, if one thing that this podcast can maybe implore people to do is to go buck that programming, buck that system, buck that kind of brainwashing that you've been put into, and realize that if there always is a right answer, you're just a machine and you're just going to produce the same results over and over again. And maybe that's what industry wants. Maybe industry is trying to get you to just be consistent, produce the results, do the thing. I don't want it. You're a number. I don't want to have to deal with you. Every time you make a mistake or you do something outside of the norm, I have to pay attention to you and I don't want to be bothered. But as an artist, you have to consider the fact that actually you want to bother people with you. You want people to, not out of your ego, but out of, hey, like, let's interrupt everything and let's fucking look at this and let's fucking pay attention to this for 90 minutes or 2 hours and fucking let's put our attention on this world, And it could be a show like Mad Men where it's like, let's put our attention on advertising and how that came to be and what is this? Let's talk about it. Let's live it. Let's experience it. And we'll bring some characters to life and breathe some life into advertising, which is otherwise a boring subject to most people. So, that was a thought that I had about, there's something about a movie is that you for a moment are letting everybody just be quiet and listen to you. Look at what you are showing them through a perspective, through a lens, literally a lens. Look at what you're showing them. And there's one other thought I had. And I hope it doesn't escape me here, Evan. I'm teetering on the edge of maybe it will. Yes, that's it. Be unreasonable. As an artist, it's just the most important thing. You got to pick your battles. You don't have to win every one of them, but some battles have to be unreasonable. You have to be like, I am not compromising. It's this way or bust. It's got to be this way, because the industry, the world of industry that wants everyone to be a number and wants everybody to be the same is always going to try to just say, just be reasonable, just be nice, just go along with the flow. Just, let's leave our options open. Let's make it workable. Sometimes you have to be like, no, this is the fucking way. This is the lens. This is the way we're going to see it. This is the way we're going to do it. It's this way. And you have to find those battles you got to pick, because I believe when we make this statement, there's something about a movie, whether we call this that or not, there's something about your point of view. There's something about the way you see it. And that has to be retained. And it is not something you compromise on. It is not something you are reasonable about. That is the whole point we're here.
Thank you for listening in on our conversation today. We hope you found something helpful that you can carry forward with you. Head over to our website, wayoftheartist.com, for more free exclusive material and learn about the show. If you haven't already, please support us by subscribing to the show, sharing it with people you know, and keeping compassionate, creative conversation going.